The early fall morning of 2017 began with an unusual disturbance in the North Milford area of Connecticut. Four unmarked vehicles quietly pulled up in front of a rundown three-story apartment building, engines shutting off while it was still not fully light. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as tactical-clad officers fanned out, sealing off every entrance and exit to the complex. Inside a ground-floor apartment, 52-year-old Derek Mullin was sitting on the living room floor, reassembling an old clock by hand, a meticulous habit he had maintained for years since moving there. Living a quiet life with no family and no one who truly knew him. A heavy knock echoed at exactly 6:41 a.m. Derek Mullin, Connecticut State Police, the voice outside announced, short and leaving no room for choice. The officers later recounted that Mullin paused, set the clock down on the floor and stood still for a few seconds, his face showing no panic, as if he had understood that this moment had finally come for him. Before diving deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys into forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The summer of 2003, the North End neighborhood of Bridgeport was steeped in heat rising from the pavement and the heavy stillness of what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. 9-year-old Lila Reyes, with her familiar red backpack, stepped off the Roosevelt school bus and walked along Maplewood Avenue toward home. The sounds of cicadas, barking dogs, and a few old air conditioners humming from two-story wooden houses formed the familiar backdrop that Lila had passed through for years. Nothing forewarned that this afternoon would become the moment torn from the peaceful orbit of her family's life. As she neared the entrance, Lila immediately sensed something wrong. The screen door at the front, which her mother always closed carefully, was ajar, swaying slightly in the hot breeze. She took a few more steps and noticed strange glints of light from the front bedroom window. Only when she bent down did Lila clearly see shards of broken glass scattered on the steps, evidence of a forceful blow from outside. Unease spread quickly, making her look around as if someone was watching. Lila entered the house, calling for her mother but getting no answer. Placing her hand on the landline phone by the door, she recoiled at seeing the cable cleanly cut, coiled on the wooden floor. Everything felt too strange, too silent. She turned to leave when she suddenly saw a tall figure standing right against the glass of the front door. In those few seconds facing those cold eyes, Lila felt danger closing in. The door was shoved hard, swinging inward. The stranger lunged into the narrow living room space with the determination of someone who had planned it all. At that exact moment, the back door opened. Lila's mother and brother returning from work and school. The confrontation unfolded in a seemingly unbelievable instant. The crash of furniture, the scuffle of feet, shattered screams amid the chaos. The perpetrator didn't take long to overpower them. With a clear physical advantage, he knocked the mother and child in different directions, sending Lila's brother collapsing and slamming her mother against the edge of a table. Amid the disorder of falling objects, the man grabbed Lila, gripping her small arm tightly and dragging her through the disarrayed house. The garage door hinges screeched as he pulled Lila to the back. In those brief seconds, her little feet scraped hard against the cement floor, then vanished into the darkness inside the garage. The engine roared to life, headlights flashed, and the car sped away from the driveway before neighbors could grasp what was happening. Inside the house, Lila's mother struggled to stand amid the toppled objects and blood streaks on the floor. Gasping breaths and calls for her child mixed with panic, making her hands shake so much she could barely dial. A neighbor rushed over, handing her a cell phone. She dialed 911 in a daze of shock and fear, her voice choking as the dispatcher answered. At that very moment, when the report of Lila Reyes's disappearance was sent out, marking the first minutes of a tense investigation. Just minutes after the choked 911 call from Lila's mother ended, the first Bridgeport Police Department patrol cars turned onto Maplewood Avenue, blue and red lights spinning and reflecting off the old porch roofs of the neighborhood. Officers immediately entered the scene, separating Lila's mother and brother from the house and moving them to temporary safety on a neighbor's porch, then quickly cordoning off the entire area with yellow tape. From the entrance, they noted the chaos right away. Furniture shoved aside, glass shards from the windows scattered across the wooden floor, and small blood streaks on the table edge. Everything indicating a quick, forceful, and purposeful attack. Crime scene technicians divided into teams, each handling specific points, one group photographing and measuring at the front door, another focusing on the living room where the struggle occurred, and a third entering the garage, the last place the family saw Lila. On the cement floor, they discovered a series of small drag marks matching a child's size, extending from the living room to the garage door. Nearby were larger shoe prints, deeper impressed, beating quick movement and strong force from a heavier person. These marks were numbered, sketched in sole patterns sampled, a crucial step for later comparison if a suspect was found. Examination of the doors showed the lock wasn't picked but forced hard from outside, the inner hinges slightly bent. The bedroom window was broken inward, with glass debris inside matching the trajectory of a strong blow. The cut phone cable had straight blade marks, proving the perpetrator brought tool. Small blood spots along the path to the garage were carefully collected, believed to be from the mother or brother during the assault, but fully sampled for analysis anyway. One officer mapped the scene and coordinated with Lila's mother and brother to establish a minute-by-minute timeline. Initial data showed Lila got off the bus in the late afternoon. The last neighbor sighting was her walking past the front yard a few minutes later. The home was breached just before she arrived, and the attack on the family lasted just over a minute before the perpetrator took Lila to the garage. The incident was swift, rapid, and calculated. From this information, police made an early assessment. Breaking the window, cutting the phone line, and handling the family so quickly showed the perpetrator wasn't acting impulsively. He knew the house, knew the daily routine, and knew when Lila returned each day. This raised the possibility that the perpetrator had been stalking or lived nearby. Another team was tasked with collecting security footage from nearby homes, stores, and intersections. Maplewood Avenue had no city cameras, so all hope relied on private devices. Police knocked on doors, requesting video checks for the hour leading up to the report. Many homes had none, but 2 across the street and a corner store did, all footage sent to analysis. Meanwhile, investigators searched the backyard, shed, and fence areas for additional escape traces. No tire marks directly in front of the house, but faint skid marks on the driveway suggested a vehicle reversing quickly. Clumps of dirt and crushed dry leaves supported this. By evening, the initial scene report was compiled. The break-in wasn't for theft. Nothing was missing. The sole target was Lila. Most traces suggested prior stalking, timing when no adult male was home, and acting in a narrow window. Within less than an hour of the 911 call, the case was elevated to child abduction emergency, an internal alert, triggering urgent search protocols. The atmosphere on Maplewood Avenue, still carrying traces of hot exhaust and summer humidities, was replaced by thick tension as investigators prepared for deeper analysis, identifying the escape route and suspicious locations nearby where the perpetrator might have taken Lila in the critical golden hour after the abduction. As scene officers finished initial evidence collection in the Reyes home, the Bridgeport PD Image Analysis Unit began processing videos collected within the hour after the report. All files were transferred directly to the department's digital center for frame-by-frame review. Since the abduction moment, the first minutes was always key to tracing the perpetrator's escape. Of the 3 camera sources, only footage from the home across the street showed notable movement, a dark-colored vehicle appearing on Maplewood Avenue at a time matching when Lila was last seen. The grainy frames from an old low-resolution camera positioned high and covering only the road edge were still enough to make out the vehicle's shape moving slowly past the Reyes home. From timestamps, the vehicle paused for dozens of seconds before disappearing from frame toward a nearby intersection. Timestamps were off by a few seconds due to clock drift, but cross-referenced with scene clocks and family statements, the timing aligned significantly. This made the analysis team unable to dismiss the possibility that this was the vehicle used to take Lila. Since the image was too blurry, next steps relied entirely on forensic video technique. The specialist team began extracting frames, enhancing contrast, reducing noise, then running algorithms to measure object sizes based on fixed markers like pole heights, road edge widths, and painted line distance. After extensive processing, the team estimated the vehicle's length as mid-size sedan or hatchback, with dark paint, most likely black or dark green. Though no license plate could be read, taillight outlines and body shape narrowed it to about 3 common models in the area. From the vehicle's movement in the video, the team further determined distance traveled in frame and estimated speed. Data showed it left Maplewood Avenue southeast, matching routes to the city's main arteries. This was crucial since Bridgeport has multiple highway exits, and quick movement could get the perpetrator out of the city in 10 to 15 minutes. 2003 traffic maps were pulled up simultaneously to simulate possibilities. From Maplewood Avenue, the perpetrator could turn onto Main Street, then merge into one of three main escape routes, I-95, Route 8, or Merritt Parkway. Each offered different distance and time profiles. I-95, the busiest and fastest, potentially reaching Stratford or Milford in minutes. Route 8, less traffic, suitable for avoiding attention. Merritt Parkway, many small turns into secluded residential areas, ideal for taking a victim to a holding spot. Based on video speed and appearance timing, almost immediately after Lila was taken to the garage, the analysis team concluded the perpetrator didn't circle, but headed straight to a pre-chosen area. The interval from leaving the Raya's home to losing camera sight fit perfectly for merging onto I-95 eastbound. From there, Bridgeport PD coordinated with state police to map suspicious addresses along main routes. Areas with high rental density, old two-story homes or prior unusual reports in recent years were prioritized. The day's final report focused on two regions: Stratford, with numerous old roads and two-story wooden homes, matching potential victim descriptions, and Milford areas with many isolated homes, private enough to hold a child. Camera analysis concluded with a strong finding: the dark vehicle was the first valuable lead, though not enough for plate or owner ID. Still, movement direction and timing showed clear calculation. A logical escape route had formed, significantly narrowing the search and paving the way for the next investigation phase, where any discrepancy in statements or traces could become the key clue to locating where Lila was taken right after disappearing. The analysis of the dark-colored vehicle from the residential camera was still ongoing when an emergency call from East Haven was unexpectedly transferred to Bridgeport PD. At a small store near the main road, a slightly injured and panicked little girl was found running in to seek help. When footage from the store's camera was sent over for confirmation, the investigators immediately recognized that face. It was Lila Raya. Just a few dozen minutes later, the rapid response team arrived in East Haven, where the girl was being held and comforted by a store employee while waiting for police. Lila was exhausted but alert, with a few scratches on her body and marks from being tightly restrained. Medical personnel provided first aid on site before transferring her to the nearest hospital for a full examination. As soon as her condition stabilized and it was confirmed there was no life-threatening danger, an experienced investigator skilled in handling child victims was sent into the exam room to gather her statement as soon as possible. In cases like this kidnapping, information from the victim in the first few hours is often crucial because the memories are still fresh and not yet distorted by external factors. In the stark white hospital room, with soft fluorescent lighting to avoid stressing the child, Lila was guided to recount what she could remember. The officers did not bombard her with questions or create pressure, but used an open-ended step-by-step approach to collect accurate data. The entire process was recorded, documented, and filed as investigative evidence. Lila started with the place where she was held. She described being taken to a small room on the second floor of a strange house. The room was simple, with a small bed against the wall, a TV that was on continuously, and a single small window positioned high up. She clearly remembered the pale wall paint and the dim light because the curtains were always half closed. Although she wasn't allowed to move freely, Lila was still able to observe the general layout: old wooden stairs that creaked every time the perpetrator went up or down, and outside the room door was a narrow hallway leading straight to the bathroom. Regarding the bathroom, Lila said that was where the perpetrator took her after each time he left the room. The bathroom was small, with light-colored tiles and a strong smell of cleaner. The most notable detail was the shower head with a metal cuff fixed to the handle above, where Lila was locked whenever he wanted to ensure she couldn't escape. Lila's description prompted the investigators to immediately note this detail because very few ordinary homes have a fixed cuff like that. It indicated premeditation. When asked about objects in the room, Lila remembered them with unusual clarity for her age. She described the bed with pale sheets, an old TV playing news and commercials all day, a small table with a few miscellaneous items the perpetrator had left, a men's watch, a clay toy shaped like a turtle, and a pizza advertisement flyer. These items would later become important clues, but at the time of the statement, police simply recorded them as background information for future cross-referencing. Lila also described the sounds she heard while being held. The most prominent was the sound of trains passing in the distance, close enough to clearly hear the steady metallic rumble but not overpowering. This helped narrow the detention location to areas near the Metro North rail line or the railroad corridor running through Stratford and Milford. Besides the train sounds, Lila remembered waves of large vehicles passing, indicating the house was near a busy road, possibly a connector or entrance to a residential area. When the investigator asked about the route from her home to the detention site, Lila recalled some features. The perpetrator drove with more left turns than right turns in the initial segment. The first part of the road was slightly uphill. Then the car drove for a long time on a straight stretch without stopping. She didn't know the exact time, but estimated the trip lasted about 20 to 30 minutes before arriving at the house. This matched the data from camera analysis, reinforcing suspicions about the escape direction toward Stratford or nearby area. Every detail Lila provided was recorded and forwarded to the analysis team. No detail was overlooked, from the room layout, objects, sounds, to the turning directions. With this data, investigators began sketching an initial physical profile, marking areas that matched Lila's description. At the same time, they prepared to cross-reference her statement with route data and footage from previous segments to pinpoint the location where she had been held in the hours after her disappearance. The detailed descriptions Lila provided in the hospital room were quickly forwarded directly to the investigation team handling camera data and crime scenes. When combining the girl's statement with previously recorded factors, the next step for police was to cross-reference the detention room reconstruction, a field sketch based on the victim's memory, with the actual structures of suspicious houses in Stratford and surrounding areas. This was a phase requiring great meticulousness, as even one matching detail, no matter how small, like the bathtub position or window direction, could significantly narrow the scope. From Lila's account, investigators compiled the most important features of the detention site: room on the second floor, adjacent or directly opposite bathroom with fixed metal cuff, single small window in the room, placed high. Old wooden stairs that made noise when moving train, sounds close enough to hear clearly, house near a traffic route with large vehicles passing. Based on these factors, the investigation team pulled up maps of residential homes in the Stratford area. The zone already circled from prior camera analysis. Though the area wasn't small, the number of older two-story homes with bathrooms adjacent and near the Metro North rail line wasn't overwhelming. Based solely on architectural descriptions, the initial list was narrowed to just over a dozen houses. From there, the team cross-referenced building records stored by the city. Two-story homes built before 1970, especially those with second-floor bathrooms designed adjacent to small bedrooms, fit best. The list was significantly reduced, and topping it was a white wooden house on Barnum Avenue, which neighbors had previously reported seeing a strange man bringing a child inside around the time of the crime. The house on Barnum Avenue matched nearly all the features Lila described. Second floor with two small rooms, one noted to have a high and narrow window. Bathroom at the start of the hallway, just a few steps from the small room. Old wooden stair structure matching the sounds Lila heard. House location only a few blocks from the rail line, close enough to hear trains as described. Police immediately elevated this house to priority suspect status and sent a team for direct inspection. The homeowner at the time was still living there, and though surprised by the reason for the police visit, allowed a preliminary check within legal limits. No entry, no forced locks, only observing public areas or places the owner led them to. Upon entering the second floor, the team noted the general layout matched many points Lila described. The small room at the end of the hallway was roughly the size she mentioned, with a high window and wall sections showing signs of recent repaint. The bathroom was in the exact position Lila said, though without the metal cuff, but a few screws in the wall indicated something had once been fixed there. However, this was only structural coincidence, not evidence. Deeper searches or sample collection in the rooms were restricted by law. Police had no search warrant. They could only observe surfaces, and unfortunately, the house was too clean at that point to expect any obvious physical evidence. The wooden floors had no distinctive marks, walls no blood traces, and the bathtub area had recently been cleaned by the owner. Any clues related to kidnapping, if they had existed, were no longer present. The investigation team left Barnum Avenue cautious. Though the house had many matches, there was no physical evidence, no direct link between the hoer and the suspect, and no grounds for a deeper search warrant. In the report sent back, the investigator noted, Barnum Avenue address requires long-term monitoring. Structure matches victim description but lacks evidence for further action. The suspect list continued to include other houses in Stratford, but Barnum Avenue remained the boldest highlight. It met all technical elements from Lila's statement, but as everyone on the team understood, architectural description alone couldn't charge anyone. Still, this White House held the top spot on the suspect list, awaiting a more specific clue in subsequent investigation steps, something no one knew at the time would take many years to appear. With the White House on Barnum Avenue emerging as the closest match to Lila's statement, but lacking sufficient evidence for deeper action, the investigation team shifted to cross-referencing route data to validate the feasibility of the journey the girl described. The victim's account of turning directions, travel duration, and distinctive road sounds were key factors in reconstructing the path from Bridgeport to the detention site before she was taken to the store in East Haven. In the initial session with her statement, the investigator had asked Lila to describe slowly and separately each road segment she remembered. The beginning where she sensed the car turning left more than right, the middle where it sped up and went straight for a long time without sudden stops, the end where it slowed before pulling into a seemingly secluded spot. Though a 9-year-old's memory couldn't be perfectly accurate, these recurring patterns helped the analysis team begin mapping the road in event packets. They pulled up 203 traffic maps, when Bridgeport's infrastructure hadn't changed much. From the Reyes home on Maplewood Avenue, multiple left turns early on suggested the perpetrator could go via Main Street and Fairfield Avenue before merging onto a major artery. Routes matching Lila's description all led in the same direction, southeast, aligning with the dark vehicle's direction, captured on residential cameras in prior analysis. When combining video data, especially estimated speed as the vehicle left Maplewood Avenue, the analysis showed the journey likely followed one of three main routes: I-95, Merritt Parkway, or Route 8, but compared to the train sounds in her statement, Route 8 was ruled out as too far from rail. Merritt Parkway was less fitting as it didn't run near the rail segments Lila described. I-95, conversely, ran parallel to the railroad corridor where Metro North trains operated every 20-30 minutes. Children in homes along this route could clearly hear trains perfectly matching Lila's memory. From I-95, the most logical direction to reach the Stratford house was exiting at exit 32, or exit 33. Direct leads into older residential areas very close to Barnum Avenue. The distance from the Reyes home to this point fit Lila's sensed 20 to 30 minutes with limited vision. Thus the reconstructed map yielded a key conclusion: the most feasible route was Bridgeport, Stratford. After extracting footage from the East Haven store where Lila was found, investigators further confirmed her appearance time perfectly aligned with travel from Stratford to East Haven at the average speed, analyzed for the dark vehicle from residential cameras. Every detail seemed to connect logically, leading investigators to believe they were very close to the detention site. However, when the report was compiled and sent to Bridgeport PD's legal department, a serious issue immediately arose. All conclusions were investigative inferences, not legal evidence. Though the route highly likely led to Stratford, and the White House on Barnum Avenue matched most of Lila's description, police faced multiple limitations. No license plate. The only camera capturing the vehicle showed a blurry shape, insufficient to identify legal owner or support charges. No physical evidence from the house. The preliminary check found no blood traces, hair, fibers, victim belongings, or anything usable for a deeper search warrant. No direct evidence linking the perpetrator to Lila. Child testimony is important but cannot alone justify arrest in Connecticut. These limitations put police in a deadlock. Though the road and detention room description seemed to fit perfectly, they couldn't rely on matching intuition for entry or detention of the homeowner. State law required clear physical evidence or direct connection between the address and victim, and so despite knowing they were very close to where Lila had been taken right after disappearing, they were forced to pause. The white Barnum Avenue house remained on the priority suspect list but couldn't be pursued further. All hope now rested on a new clue emerging, a small sample, a late witness, or another camera. But nothing came. The case, from a seemingly expanding investigation direction, suddenly hit a dead end due to legal limitations, a solid wall halting any progress, awaiting something no one knew at the time would take many years to appear. The road analyses and the significant match between Lila's statements and the structure of the White House on Barnum Avenue had brought a slim hope that police were getting closer to the essence of the case. But just as the investigation team tried to take one more step, a legal wall blocked the entire process. The lack of a license plate, no physical evidence recovered from the suspected house, and no direct connection between the homeowner and Lila left all efforts in limbo. Everything matched, but nothing was enough to act on. And it was this very point that led to the most difficult phase of any investigation, the phase where time begins to blur everything. In the first weeks after the kidnapping, police continued to sweep the Stratford, Milford, and surrounding area. Patrol teams were deployed along the rail line to look for unusual signs in abandoned houses. K-9 units were repeatedly sent to search small woods and forgotten warehouses. But after each operation, the results remained the same. Nothing new. Houses with structures similar to the one on Barnum Avenue were checked through soft approaches, but none showed any connection. No witness came forward with additional information. No anonymous calls provided significant leads. Time dragged into the third month, then the fourth. Lila had returned, but the perpetrator had completely vanished, as if he had never existed in Bridgeport. Every report sent to headquarters recorded the same thing: no progress. Potential suspects were gradually ruled out. Previous clues that had drawn attention, the train sounds, the second-floor bathroom, the items in the room, could not be verified because there was no physical evidence from any address. The police were like standing in the middle of a large map where every road led back to the starting point. In child kidnapping investigations, when no new signs emerge in the first 6 months, the solve rate drops sharply to an alarming level. In Lila's case, the passing time made collecting physical traces increasingly impossible. If the room where the girl was held had ever existed, it could have been completely altered, repainted, or even rebuilt. If the perpetrator had left items or traces, they could have been destroyed during the homeowner's normal activity. With each passing day, the reliability of any remaining samples diminished to the point where they could no longer serve as evidence. After more than half a year of exhaustion, the investigation summary report was compiled. No identified suspect, no physical evidence from the detention location, no direct evidence proving the actions of any individual, unable to obtain search warrants or detentions at any address. In that situation, Bridgeport PD had to follow the state's standard procedure: cases with no significant progress over a long period, especially when there is no ongoing risk to the victim, since the victim has been found, would be transferred to the cold case unit for storage and passive monitoring. This decision was not due to lack of goodwill, but because the main investigation team had to focus on cases with greater urgency, while Lila's case lacked the required elements to be legally advanced. On the day the file was transferred, a thick set of documents including Lila's statements, camera analyses, room diagrams from memory, scene reports, and the list of suspected addresses was stamped intact. It was entered into the cold case unit's storage system with its own case number, along with the note "potential for resolution if new physical evidence emerges." In the years that followed, the Lila Reyes kidnapping became one of Connecticut's most notable unsolved abductions. The media occasionally mentioned it, usually in retrospective articles about long-standing cold cases. Both police and the community knew the perpetrator was still out there somewhere, but no one knew who he was, where he lived, or whether he had returned to the area. Everything stopped at vague guesses and a lingering sense of incompleteness, always hovering around the case name. And then years passed without a single new clue appearing. The Lila Reyes case lay dormant in storage, until one day, more than 14 years later, an unexpected piece of evidence was found, accidentally reigniting the entire story that seemed forever buried. When the Lila Reyes kidnapping file was transferred to the cold case unit, veteran investigators reviewed all the documents to identify the remaining leads, pieces of information once hoped to lead to a breakthrough, but ultimately deemed unusable. This compilation served as a final snapshot of the investigation process before the file entered long-term hibernation. The first and most important lead was the detention room diagram that Lila drew herself right after being found. The sketch showed a relatively clear layout: a small room at the end of the second-floor hallway, with a high window, a single bed against the wall, and a bathroom nearby. For the investigators, this diagram was once considered the most direct clue, reflecting the clear memory of a child who had endured a stressful situation. But the problem was that second-floor layouts with similar arrangements were not rare in old houses in Stratford. Many homes had nearly identical structures, enough to make the diagram unable to pinpoint a single specific address. It only had directional value and could not be used as legal evidence. The second lead was the descriptions of sounds and items in the detention room. Lila remembered the regular sound of trains passing, which had helped narrow the area to places near the Metro North line. She also recalled the noise of large vehicles passing by, suggesting the house was near a busy road. But when cross-referenced with area maps, the scope remained too broad. Both Stratford and Milford were adjacent to the rail line, and dozens of older residential areas bordered major roads. The items in the room, a men's watch, a small clay toy, a pizza flyer, were at the time only treated as memory descriptions. None were found at any address, and thus they could not become legal ground. They were simply listed in the category of potential leads if physical evidence appears in the future. The third lead was the image of the dark-colored vehicle captured on residential camera. The video analysis team did everything possible, enhancing brightness, reducing noise, measuring length, identifying body type, estimating speed and direction. But despite maximizing forensic video technology, the footage still showed no license plate or clear identifying feature. No plate meant no way to trace the owner. No unique characteristics meant no way to narrow it to a specific vehicle model. This was one of the biggest bottlenecks in the file. Finally, and the most controversial lead internally, was the White House on Barnum Avenue. This was the house that matched Lila's statements the most. A small second-floor room, a bathroom near a narrow window, close to the train tracks, with architecture fitting the time frame. But when police conducted preliminary checks, they recovered no physical evidence, no blood traces, no strange fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA, no victim belongings. The unusual cleanliness had raised suspicions among investigators, but no matter how strong the suspicion is not evidence. Therefore the house was classified as notable but no further action possible. State legal provisions did not allow deep searches without clear probable cause. Doing so could invalidate the entire case in court. When compiling the four types of leads, the room diagram, sounds and items, dark vehicle and the Barnum Avenue White House, the cold case unit had to conclude that none had the potential to become strong enough evidence. All matched inferentially, but none met the legal match standard. They existed as scattered pieces, missing the critical link to form a complete picture. And so the Lila Reyes file was closed in a special state. Many suspicious directions, many potential leads, but not a single piece of legal evidence to turn suspicion into action, or action into charges. This is the type of case most likely to get stuck in criminal investigations, enough information to believe the perpetrator could be found, but lacking any basis to pursue it fully. For many years the case lay dormant on the cold case unit's shelf. Those leads, once seen as keys, gradually became faded lines in old documents, not strong enough to reopen the investigation, but impossible to ignore. They remained there, existing as disconnected parts, waiting for real evidence to appear and restart the entire investigative machine after more than a decade of deadlock. The faint remaining leads from the Lila Reyes case lay in the cold case unit's storage for over a decade, with no significant developments. The file was considered potentially solvable, but not strong enough to warrant reopening, and all prior efforts had been limited by the complete absence of physical evidence. However, in 2017, an event that seemed unrelated suddenly broke the long-standing deadlock, and it started from the very place once considered the most critical suspect, the White House on Barnum Avenue. The new owners of the house, a young couple who had just moved in, decided to renovate the entire second floor because the old wooden floor was warped and showing signs of deterioration. They had no idea that this house had once been on the suspect list for a 2003 kidnapping, let alone that police had visited to check the structure. To them it was just an old house needing upgrades for modern living. During the process of removing the wooden floor in the small room at the end of the hallway, the very room police had suspected for years, the worker discovered an unusual hollow space. It wasn't a normal floor cavity but a section of wood loosely fitted, not aligning perfectly with the rest of the floor. When prying it with a crowbar, the piece lifted to reveal a void underneath, wide enough to hide something compact. Inside that void, the worker saw a decayed cardboard box, covered in dust and wedged between two floor joists. Seeing the anomaly and concerned it might involve something dangerous or belongings of previous owners, the homeowners immediately contacted Stratford Police for inspection. Upon hearing the address, Barnum Avenue, local police immediately recalled the 2003 case and quickly contacted the cold case unit of the Connecticut State Police, the unit storing the file. Within hours, 2 veteran investigators from the team were at the house to verify the information. When the cardboard box was carefully removed and placed on a temporary examination table in the living room, the cover had softened from time, but the overall shape remained intact. The investigator noted that it resembled a small pizza box. This immediately raised attention because in the 2003 statement, Lila had described a pizza flyer in the detention room among other items. That detail, once insufficient to become evidence without the physical object, now suddenly reappeared in tangible form. Upon opening the box, inside they saw a collection of old items, partially wrapped in dust and torn paper: a men's watch, a small clay toy shaped like a turtle, a pale fabric piece that had been children's underwear, and a yellowed pizza takeaway flyer. These items matched astonishingly with what Lila had described from memory in 2003, descriptions that police had been forced to classify as information without corroborating physical evidence. On the spot, the cold case unit immediately sealed the box according to evidence procedure, photographed the entire discovery location, and requested the homeowners to halt all renovation activities. The second-floor room was secured for deeper examination, as this void did not appear in any building diagrams collected in This strongly suggested that someone had deliberately created this hiding spot. For the investigation team, this was the moment they had waited 14 years for: real physical evidence, not descriptions, not guesses, a lead that could be tested for DNA, examined forensically, and from there reopen the entire case with full legal basis. The event was recorded in the report as an unexpected situation, changing the file status, immediately qualifying the cold case unit to officially reactivate the investigation. The items in the box could contain DNA from the perpetrator, the victim, or fingerprints, and more importantly, their appearance at the very address suspected in 2003 turned Barnum Avenue from a speculative point into a location of evidentiary value. The opportunity to reopen the Lila Reyes case after 14 years emerged from a seemingly meaningless cardboard box, and from that moment, the entire investigative machinery of the state of Connecticut began moving again, this time with greater hope than ever that the mystery hanging for a decade and a half could finally be resolved. The moment the cold case unit opened the rotting cardboard box found under the second-floor flooring of the house on Barnum Avenue, it instantly shifted the focus of the entire investigation. The contents inside the box were not only unusual, but also matched in an astonishing way with what Lila had described back in 2003. Details that police at the time had been forced to classify as memory descriptions, not yet verifiable. Now everything was lying right in front of them, in the form of actual physical evidence. Inside the small pizza box, even though the cardboard had darkened and rotted in many places, the investigators could clearly identify 4 items. First was a men's watch, round-faced, with a metal case that had tarnished over time. The strap was cracked, but on the back there was still a faint engraving, something Lila had described as a man's watch left on the table. This piece of evidence could carry fingerprints or DNA and was considered the most important item in the box. Under the watch was a child's pale-colored underwear, the fabric old and slightly wrinkled, but still intact. This was an extremely sensitive piece of evidence, as it had the potential to contain biological traces from the victim and could be directly linked to the time the girl was held captive. In the 2003 records, Lila had said she tried to take something of her own and hide it, with the intention of leaving it for police to find in the future. When the investigators saw this piece of fabric, they were almost certain that Lila was the one who had placed it in the box. The third item was a small clay toy shaped like a turtle. It had hardened over time, but the shape was still intact. This was a particularly important detail, because in her statement, Lila had clearly said she saw a small animal-shaped toy on a shelf in the captivity room. A clay toy, something not common in an adult's room, strengthened the suspicion that the room where she was held contained items left by the perpetrator himself. Finally, there was a missing child flyer from 2003, yellowed and with edges crumbling. Though not an official police flyer, it was considered a photocopy of a missing child notice, the kind often posted on utility poles in the area. Lila had said that in the room there was a paper with a picture of a missing child, and the appearance of this item in the box almost directly connected the physical evidence to her statement. When examining the placement of each item in the box, the investigators realized the arrangement was not random. The items were in a neatly layered state, as if someone had intentionally placed them inside in a specific order rather than them falling in accidentally. This perfectly matched the action Lila had described years earlier. The little girl tried to hide clues to help police trace the captivity location if she couldn't escape on her own. As soon as the preliminary assessment was complete, the cold case unit immediately began the evidence sealing process. The box and all the items were placed into specialized evidence bags, sealed with tamper-proof labels, and assigned new case numbers. At the same time, they also took detailed photos from multiple angles: the location under the floor where the box was found, the structure of the cavity, the condition of each item, and traces of dust and rotting paper around it. A particularly important point in this process was the direct connection between the evidence in the box and Lila's 2003 statement. In the report, the investigators noted clearly, all 4 items highly match the victim's descriptions from the initial investigation. Probability of coincidence is low. The presence of this physical evidence strongly reinforced all previous assessments about the Barnum Avenue house, turning an address once deemed insufficient legal basis into the fail point of the reopened investigation. That same day, all the evidence was transferred to the forensic lab of the Connecticut State Police, where forensic experts would analyze DNA, fingerprints, fabric fibers, organic materials, and even microparticle samples that might be attached to the clay toy or inside the pizza box. The forensic technicians also had the task of determining the age of the box, the state of paper decomposition, and the degradation rate of the materials to confirm that the items had truly been under the floor for many years. This was the first time in 14 years that the case had real physical evidence, a turning point that could completely change the entire situation. The small items in the pizza box not only led back to Lila's statement, but also opened the door for police to scientifically trace the perpetrator's trail, rather than relying solely on inference as before. As soon as the pizza box and its contents were transferred to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Lab, the entire analysis process was prioritized at the highest level. This was not only the first physical evidence in the 14 years since the case was closed, but also the only opportunity to answer the most important question: who held Lila Reyes captive? As the forensic technicians began opening each sealed bag, they knew that any tiny trace could reverse the conclusions of an entire decade of deadlock. The first sample tested was the child's underwear. This item had the highest potential for DNA because the fabric absorbs well and preserves biological traces longer than hard surfaces. The technicians cut sections of fabric that were still intact and not rotted, then ran the DNA extraction process, using technology far more advanced than in. Just a few days later, they obtained strong enough genetic data to enter into CODIS, the National DNA Database. The results came back faster than expected. The DNA recovered from the evidence matched perfectly with the profile of an individual arrested in 2012 for a minor offense related to a civil dispute. The name in the records, Derek Mullin, a man who had lived in the Stratford area in the early. The match was not just approximate but reached 100% certainty, the level at which forensics could declare it could not be anyone else. Next was the testing of the men's watch found in the box. On the back and the metal strap, the technicians discovered several fingerprint ridges, still clear enough for analysis. The AFIS system, the National Fingerprint Database, returned a match to the same name, Derek Mullin. While DNA matching on one piece of evidence could be seen as unusual or coincidental, adding fingerprints on a completely different item raised the reliability to near absolute. The clay toy and the flyer were also examined, but because the surfaces were heavily rotted and contaminated with dust after more than a decade under the floor, the samples obtained were not sufficient for deep analysis. However, in the case file, Lila had clearly described seeing the turtle-shaped toy and the flyer in the captivity room. Their presence in the box still carried strong corroborative meaning, even without useful DNA. When compiling all the results, the investigators could paint a clearer picture than at any previous point, Evidence containing Derek Mullin's DNA and fingerprints had been under the Barnum Avenue house floor for over. This not only proved Mullin was present at that location, but also showed a direct connection between him and the captivity room Lila described. More importantly, the match between the 2003 statement and the physical evidence found in 2017 allowed police to confirm the Barnum Avenue house was indeed where Lila was held. This was a point they could previously only speculate on but not prove due to lack of evidence. With the analysis results, every piece had been connected by indisputable legal proof. Immediately, a special report was submitted to the Connecticut State Prosecutor's Office. The report detailed the coincidence between the evidence, the statement, forensic data, and Mullin's residential history. Within just 48 hours, the order to reopen the Lila Reyes case investigation was officially approved, allowing police to expand search warrants, access records, and proceed with steps to prepare for a suspect apprehension operation. After 14 years frozen, the case now had a name to focus on: Derek Mullin, the man who had disappeared from police sight after 2003, but left undeniable traces in the very room that Lila had described from the memory of a 9-year-old child. The case had shifted from deadlock to a hotspot, and the entire state investigation system began moving in a new direction toward a suspect now validated by science. The DNA and fingerprint analysis results brought the name Derek Mullin to the new center of the investigation, prompting the cold case unit to immediately expand the scope to trace his entire life history, residences, and movements over more than a decade and a half. This was to determine whether Mullin was in Stratford at the time of Lila's abduction, and whether the places he lived matched the routes, sounds, and spatial features Lila described. From civil data was pulled from tax systems, rental records, residency registrations, and even old administrative violation reports. The results showed Mullin had lived in Stratford during the early 2000s, right in the area surrounding Barnum Avenue. This address was just a few blocks from the White House, where the evidence was found. The short distance meant a pedestrian could easily go back and forth, let alone by car. Living in the exact suspect area created the first link between Mullin and the captivity location described by Lila. The 2003 traffic routes were mapped out, overlaid with the period Mullin lived in Stratford. The investigators noted that every detail in Lila's statement matched the surrounding terrain: the Metro North line running close to the residential area, the small roads leading to I-95, the low traffic turns she mentioned when recounting the drive. Starting from Maplewood Avenue, Lila's home, the perpetrator could reach Barnum Avenue in a timeframe matching the girl's memory. The residency timeline continued to expand. Records showed Mullin moved from Stratford and registered in New Haven, in a low-cost temporary housing complex. This area was adjacent to two major traffic axes connecting to East Haven and Milford. The location where Lila was released, a small store in East Haven, fell completely within Mullin's silence travel range during this period. The journey leaving Stratford via I-95, then appearing in East Haven, matched the direction of the dark-colored car seen in the 2003 camera footage. After that time, the data continued to show Mullin moved to Milford, living in a quiet residential area near the coastal road. This was an area with many side roads leading directly to Route 1 and I-95, allowing quick travel between nearby cities without drawing attention. The years in Milford left no trace of serious crimes, but Mullin's unusual stability during this period suggested he deliberately kept a low profile, avoiding any incidents that might cause authorities to recheck his identity. A key point emerged in the legal data: Mullin's fingerprints and DNA were only in the system because of one arrest related to a minor civil dispute. Without this incident, the DNA in the pizza box might never have found a match. This confirmed Mullin was not a habitual social disruptor. He lived quietly long enough to avoid signs that would alert police at the critical time. The residency data was overlaid on the 2003 traffic map, then cross-referenced with the route Lila described. The investigators determined Mullin had full access to Maplewood Avenue, geographic conditions suitable to take Lila to Barnum Avenue, and a feasible route to East Haven, where the girl was found. No period in Mullin's living history contradicted the hypothesis that he was the perpetrator. On the contrary, every piece of information fit together like a tight network. The investigation team compiled the file and concluded clearly Mullin had been right in the center of the suspect area at the time of the crime, had no alibi evidence, and his movement pattern in the years after showed he tried to maintain unusual secrecy. At the end of the report, Mullin's address in Milford was identified as the first point of approach in the next phase. A point of approach now with full legal basis to request surveillance and search warrant. The final human piece had fallen into its proper place in the 14-year interrupted picture, and from this point, the investigation no longer revolved around speculation, but shifted to pursuing a clearly identified suspect. Determining Derek Mullin's current address in Milford shifted the investigation into the field operations phase, where every move had to be cautious, discreet, and strictly in line with legal procedure. The cold case unit, working with Milford police, coordinated to plan surveillance around the apartment complex where Mullin lived, gathering the latest data before applying for an arrest warrant. No step could go wrong, as any mistake could alert the suspect and cause him to disappear again, something that had happened for years following the two. Surveillance began with establishing a fixed observation post in the parking area behind the three-story building, where Mullin rented a first-floor apartment. Two teams rotated shifts, using unmarked vehicles and observing from a distance far enough to avoid drawing attention. This went on for several days to map out Mullin's daily routines, times he left and returned home, how often he went out, the routes he typically took, and any social contacts or personal items he carried. In the early days, investigators noted that Mullin's routine was almost regimented. He left in the morning, returned late in the afternoon, and rarely interacted with neighbors. Whenever he went out, Mullin usually carried a small black backpack and a compact toolkit that looked like basic repair gear. This consistent pattern was flagged in reports as noteworthy, not because the items themselves were unusual, but because Mullin's unwavering adherence to routine suggested he was cautious and rarely deviated from his schedule. Additionally, Mullin regularly used the same older dark blue car, a sedan model from the 2000s. Though it wasn't the vehicle seen in the 2003 video, investigators logged every relevant detail: license plate, usual parking spot, and driving routes in and out of the area. Any piece of information could prove useful in building the arrest warrant application. As surveillance continued over the following days, investigators started recording smaller but significant behaviors. Mullin always scanned the surrounding area before leaving the house, as if out of habitual vigilance. He rarely spoke to neighbors beyond brief pleasantry. His grocery shopping was less frequent than average, and some days he didn't leave the apartment at all. These observations were added to the file to assess potential risk levels and whether Mullin might sense he was being watched. Though there were no signs he knew about the surveillance, the team still rotated shifts regularly, changed observation positions, and varied vehicles to maintain cover. Each piece of data was compiled to form a detailed picture of Mullin's current behavior. His unusually stable lifestyle, long-term reclusiveness, and lack of significant social connections all pointed to a pattern typical of individuals who have committed serious crimes but try to maintain a quiet existence to avoid detection. During surveillance, investigators also paid close attention to any items Mullin carried to his car or brought into the apartment. This wasn't to find direct evidence, but to check for signs he might be destroying documents, discarding unusual items, or preparing to flee, behaviors that could force police to act immediately. But through the end of the second week, nothing deviated from his regular routine. Data collected over weeks of surveillance was organized into three main categories: movement patterns, frequently carried personal items, and daily activity inside the apartment. All of it helped build a supplemental file proving Mullin had no alibi, had previously lived in the suspect area, and was now living stably, key factors for the arrest warrant, as prosecutors needed assurance the suspect wasn't being wrongly targeted or legally mishandled. These surveillance details, combined with DNA results, fingerprints, and evidence from Barnum Avenue, formed a solid foundation for preparing the arrest warrant application for Mullin. The investigation team was nearly at the final step. All that remained was submitting the file to the prosecutor and awaiting approval, a decision that could end 14 years of deadlock and move into the arrest phase for someone who had evaded police for so long. The complete surveillance file, combined with DNA and fingerprint results from the pizza box, carried enough weight for the prosecutor to sign the arrest warrant. The order was issued on a weekend evening, and Connecticut State Police's SWAT team immediately planned the operation. Mullin's apartment was in an older three-story building with narrow entrances and a rear courtyard that could easily be blocked, an ideal setup for a dawn arrest when the suspect would be least alert. Before dawn broke, the quiet Milford neighborhood remained still in the early morning hush. SWAT approached from two directions. One team moved in on the front door, while the other circled to the back to seal off the garage and parking area. The spot Mullin usually left from each morning. Cold case unit investigators, who had followed the case for years, were also present, positioned behind the deployment line to monitor events. Everyone understood that capturing Mullin wasn't just the end of a 14-year pursuit, it was the link between truth and the fragmented memories of a little girl who had fought to survive. The signal came from the SWAT team leader. 3 loud knocks echoed on the wooden door, followed by a clear command. The brief silence that followed, only seconds long, was enough to confirm Mullin was inside. Sounds from within showed the suspect startling and moving quickly, not toward the front door but toward the rear exit. The team covering the back immediately spotted Mullin trying to force open the emergency door to the small courtyard. He only managed to open it a few inches before it was blocked by 2 agents standing guard. Mullin instinctively backed away, but the front team had already breached the door and closed in from the opposite side. Both directions converged, creating a choke point with no escape. Commands to get down on the ground were repeated multiple times. Mullin resisted for a few seconds, twisting, trying to dodge, but SWAT ended it quickly with standard takedown techniques. He was handcuffed in under 20 seconds from the moment the door was breached. As Mullin was led outside, his face showed a mix of panic and shock, as if the entire 14-year past he had tried to escape had just been dragged back to his doorstep. The surveillance team had watched him for weeks, but this was the first time they saw him completely lose control. Once Mullin was cuffed and loaded into a vehicle, investigators and forensics entered the apartment to conduct a court-ordered search. Every room was documented, marked, and examined by procedure. In the kitchen and bedroom, many unrelated items were quickly ruled out, but several stood out. A small coil of rope and duct tape, stored in the toolkit Mullin often carried. A rusted metal restraint segment, no longer intact, but matching the description of the cuff once fixed in the bathroom where Lila was held. An old notebook containing brief notes on routes and driving schedules from the early 2000s. A small plastic box, holding scraps of fabric and torn paper, hidden in a drawer near the back door. These items didn't directly confirm Mullin's role in the 2003 crime, but they added to the behavioral profile, especially when compared to the holding room structure Lila had described. The duct tape, rope, and metal cuff matched materials consistent with the captivity setup police had long suspected. The apartment was thoroughly searched that morning. The findings not only reinforced the basis for the arrest warrant, but also opened new forensic analysis avenues for the prosecution phase. As the vehicle carrying Mullin left the neighborhood, the capture operation ended, but a new chapter in the investigation began. Police had finally brought the suspect into the legal system, and the next steps were interrogation, timeline cross-checking, and preparing all evidence to bring Mullin into the light at trial. After more than a decade and a half of silence, the Lila Reyes case had entered its decisive phase. Mullin was transported from Milford to Connecticut State Police headquarters in complete silence, not resisting but also not cooperating. After more than 14 years of evasion, he seemed to understand the net had closed, yet he still tried to appear calm as he was led into the interrogation room. A stark, cold space where 2 cold case unit investigators were already waiting. The session began with basic questions about identity and residence, which Mullin answered mechanically. When the conversation reached 2003, he grew defensive, denying he ever lived near Barnum Avenue, denying any contact with Lila, denying any connection to the abduction he claimed to have only heard about in the news back then. To the investigators, this was a familiar response from suspects trying to keep their stories fragmented, hoping everything rested on speculation. But this was no longer a case built on speculation. The investigator placed a sealed evidence bag in front of Mullin, containing the men's watch confirmed to have his fingerprint. Mullin's expression changed for a moment, but he still tried to explain it away as maybe a watch I lost long ago. The investigator then placed a second bag on the table, holding the child's underwear fragment with DNA conclusively matching his. Silence filled the room. There was no more room to maneuver. As the investigator read the forensic conclusion, their DNA was found on an item recovered from the room where the victim stated she was held, in a box hidden under the floor of the Barnum Avenue house more than 14 years ago. Mullin leaned back in his chair, lowered his head and sighed. His defensive wall cracked, not from threats in the questioning but because he knew the evidence was now scientifically irrefutable. Mullin didn't confess immediately. He sat silent for several minutes, avoiding eye contact, then in a hoarse voice admitted, he was the one who abducted Lila Reyes in 2000. The confession was fully recorded, opening a flood of information police had waited over a decade to hear. According to his account, Mullin had stalked the Reyes family for weeks before acting, choosing a time when Lila often walked home alone. He knew exactly the entry and exit points, their routines, and picked Maplewood Avenue simply because there was no traffic then. Regarding the route, Mullin described dragging Lila to the garage, putting her in the car, and driving the path investigators had long suspected, making repeated left turns through side streets, merging onto I-95, before circling back to the Barnum Avenue house. Most striking was how Mullin's confession matched the holding room diagram Lila drew in 2003, small room at the end of the hallway, high window, creaky wooden stairs, bathroom right near the exit, cuff fixed to the shower faucet handle. Mullin admitted he had prepared the room to keep Lila for a few days, but hadn't anticipated the family's fierce resistance and the rapid police response. When news of the abduction spread, Mullin panicked, didn't dare hold the victim longer, and decided to release her at the store in East Haven to avoid pursuit. When asked why the evidence was hidden under the Barnum Avenue floor, Mullin admitted that after releasing Lila, he returned home, gathered everything that had been in the room, stuffed it into the pizza box, and stashed it temporarily under the floorboards to clean the room as fast as possible. This perfectly matched where the pizza box was found. Another key detail emerged when investigators asked about other items or traces he might have left elsewhere. Mullin stated he had disposed of additional items, mostly rope, fabric and small tools at Silver Sands State Park in Milford, an area with rocky shore and tidal zones where items could easily be swept away. The location was near where he lived at the time and fully consistent with the movement patterns surveillance had recorded. Everything Mullin provided, locations, routes, room layout, evidence concealment method, and disposal site, aligned with what Lila had described or what police had suspected, but couldn't prove. His confession combined with the DNA evidence, closed every gap that had existed in the case file for 4. As the interrogation ended, investigators noted in the report, suspect Derek Mullin has admitted full responsibility for the unlawful confinement of victim Lila Reyes in 2000. Confession reveals disposal site for items at Silver Sands requiring immediate search. The investigative arc spanning more than a decade and a half had finally closed, with the words of the man who once believed he had buried his past under a floorboard forever. Mullin's statement about disposing of evidence at Silver Sands State Park immediately triggered a large-scale crime scene search operation. The park stretches along the Milford coastline, featuring sandy beaches, rocky shoreline areas, and numerous seasonal tidal reed zones. A perfect location for concealing small objects, where time and tides could erase most human traces. This made the search challenging and required the most precise forensic techniques. The Cold Case Unit, working with K-9 units, specialized in human remains detection, and state forensic experts, divided the park into search grids based on Mullin's description, an area with large rocks, near a side trail, about a few dozen steps from the water's edge. Although the statement did not pinpoint an exact location, these details helped narrow down a manageable section of the park without needing to close the entire area. The K-9 teams began sweeping from the north, where rocks and tree roots formed natural crevices. The specially trained dogs could detect the scent of decomposition, even after years of exposure to the marine environment. Whenever a dog showed a reaction, the area was marked for deeper examination by forensic experts. Simultaneously, the forensic team used metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and probing rods to identify anomalies beneath the sand or gravel. During the initial hours, the signals detected yielded no clear results. Tides, erosion and landscape changes over 14 years had obscured many traces. However, late in the afternoon, one of the K-9 dogs reacted strongly in an area bordering the rocky section and a tall reed strip along the trail. This was a spot rarely visited by tourists, and considered one of the park's most secluded areas. The area was immediately cordoned off. The forensic team began excavating the light top layer of sand, then used small tools to avoid damaging anything below. After a few minutes, a shovel hit something hard, producing a sound different from natural rocks. As the soil was cleared away, a faded piece of old fabric emerged, the color matching the description of the clothing Lila was wearing on the day she was abducted. Just a minute later, experts confirmed it was part of a child's clothing buried shallowly under the sand. The discovery of the clothing heightened the urgency. The forensic team continued digging with greater precision, using brushes and specialized tools to preserve any remaining biological tissue. As the final layer of soil was removed, small bone fragments, including those from a child's hand and foot, gradually appeared. The bones were intact in structure, indicating a hastily buried body that had not been completely washed away by tides. Preliminary on-site findings suggested these were likely the remains of a missing person from 2003, matching the time frame and size of unsolved child disappearances in the New Haven Milford area at that time. This immediately expanded the scope of the Lila Reyes case. Mullin might be linked to other victims beyond Lila, something that had not been seriously considered before due to lack of evidence. Along with the remains and clothing, the forensic team recovered a piece of tape, a rotted length of rope, and a small metal fragment that was once part of a restraint or lock. These items were sealed according to protocol, photographed at the scene, and documented as additional physical evidence. The atmosphere at the scene grew somber as the forensic team confirmed how closely Mullin's statement matched the excavation site. This not only fully corroborated his prior confession, but also revealed that he had deliberately disposed of the evidence in a calculated manner, choosing a little-known location far enough away to avoid direct connection for many years. As the sun set behind the tall reeds at the park's edge, the final pieces of evidence were loaded onto a specialized vehicle for in-depth lab analysis. The cold case unit noted in its interim report, disposal site at Silver Sands State Park, matches suspect state. Evidence and remains believed related to 2003 child disappearance recovered. Expanded investigation underway. This excavation not only validated Mullin's statement, but also opened new depths to the case, shifting the narrative from a single surviving victim to the possibility of other victims who vanished during the same period. What no one had dared consider before was now clearly revealed beneath the sands of Silver Sand. The evidence recovered from Silver Sands State Park was transported directly to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Lab, where experts immediately began analysis. Priority was given to bones and teeth, the most durable tissues capable of preserving DNA long-term, even in the constantly changing environment of a coastal beach. This examination was seen as the critical step in identifying the victim, determining cause of death, and reconstructing the full timeline of the case. The molar teeth were extracted first, as tooth enamel provides the best protection against decomposition. Modern DNA sequencing technology was applied, allowing extraction of genetic markers despite exposure to salt, temperature, bacteria, and time. After hours of continuous processing, the lab issued a preliminary report. The DNA profile from the teeth matched exactly with Lila Reyes's DNA, which had been stored in the system since she was found and treated in. The match reached a probability of error less than 1 in a trillion, allowing forensics to conclude with absolute certainty that the remains were those of Lila Reyes, the girl previously believed to be a surviving victim. This result sent shockwaves through the cold case unit. The entire assumption held for 14 years had to be completely rewritten. What investigators had believed was a miraculous survival turned out to be only part of the story, with a far more brutal truth concealed by Mullin's statements for many years. The next step was determining cause of death. The arm and rib bones showed trauma not from natural decomposition, but fractures that occurred before burial. Some bones exhibited signs of high-impact force, consistent with strangulation or being pressed hard against a surface. There was no evidence of knife wounds or sharp object trauma, but small fractures on the hyoid bone suggested compression to the neck area. Forensics concluded the likely cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, occurring very shortly after Mullin released the girl in East Haven, or soon after he took her to the Silver Sands area. The shallow burial with only a thin layer of sand indicated rushed disposal without long-term planning. This aligned with Mullin's statement that he didn't know what to do after releasing the girl and panicked, though his earlier accounts had already been proven unreliable. Time of death was estimated based on soft tissue decomposition, natural joint separation, and clothing degradation. Experts determined Lila died within 24 to 48 hours of her abduction, not released as Mullin had implied in his initial statement. This explained why he hastily disposed of the body at Silver Sands and left many items in the holding room that he didn't have time to destroy. As the forensic results were added to the Cold Case Unit's analysis board, the entire case timeline became clear. Lila was abducted from her home on Maplewood Avenue. Mullin took her to the house on Barnum Avenue, the holding location described in statement. She died within 2 days, likely from asphyxiation or compression. Mullin gathered related items into a pizza box and hid it under the floor. The body was transported to Silver Sands and hastily buried in the rocks near the trail. All the pieces' DNA in the house, Mullin's statements, the disposal site and lab results, now formed a unified chain of events with no ambiguous gaps like in the early investigation year. The case was considered evidence closed, with sufficient elements to prosecute Mullin on the highest charges. The forensic results not only confirmed the victim but affirmed the full truth of what happened. The girl who fought to survive ultimately could not overcome the tragedy, and the truth lay buried in the sand for nearly 15 years before seeing the light. From this point the case entered its final phase, prosecution and trial of the perpetrator whose crimes spanned a generation. The forensic confirmation of Lila Reyes's identity propelled the case directly into prosecution. The Connecticut State Prosecutor's Office held a special meeting with the Cold Case Unit to prepare the trial dossier, a hundreds-page file including physical evidence, forensic analysis, Mullin's statements, and the fully reconstructed timeline after nearly 50. Each piece of evidence was organized in clear sequence, ensuring the jury saw the seamless progression from Lila's disappearance to the discovery of her remains at Silver Sands State Park. Derek Mullin's trial opened at the Connecticut Superior Court amid intense media and community attention, especially from Bridgeport residents, where the 2003 disappearance had caused shockwaves. In the courtroom, the prosecutor presented the full case structure, starting with the pizza box containing a men's watch, clay toy, children's underwear, and flyer, the initial evidence that broke over a decade of deadlock. Each item was projected on a large screen, with fingerprints, DNA and archival photos proving they had been under the Barnum Avenue floor, just as Lila described years earlier. Next, the prosecutor introduced DNA analysis from the forensic lab. Mullin's DNA matched on fabric samples. His fingerprints were on the watch. Critically, Lila's DNA appeared on items confirmed to be in the holding room. These results were presented in visual scientific comparisons, making it clear to the jury that the evidence could not have randomly appeared under the Barnum Avenue floor. They were traces of actual captivity. The next section was Mullin's detailed recorded and videotaped confession, admitting to holding Lila. Though the defense attorney attempted to undermine it by arguing mental coercion, the fact that he provided the Silver Sands disposal location, where police later found remains, rendered all counter-arguments ineffective. The prosecutor then presented the complete case timeline. Mullin stalked the Reyes family, waiting for an opportunity. Lila was abducted from her home on Maplewood Avenue. Mullin took her to the second-floor room at Barnum Avenue, matching the described structure. He hid evidence under the floor and left the house after the incident. Lila died within 2 days, with cause of death determined by forensics as mechanical asphyxiation. Remains were disposed of at Silver Sands State Park. Mullin relocated, attempting to erase traces for nearly 15 years until the pizza box was discovered. The clear unified timeline backed by science exposed Mullin's actions layer by layer before the jury. No part of his story contradicted the scene evidence. On the contrary, every detail in his statement further reinforced the crimes. During sentencing, the jury took just over 3 hours to reach unanimous agreement. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the final verdict. Derek Mullin is convicted of first-degree kidnapping, first-degree murder, and tampering with a body. Sentence: life imprisonment without parole. Mullin showed no reaction, only bowing his head as if he had anticipated the outcome. For Lila, justice came late, very late, but it finally arrived, built from the small clues she desperately left behind. When the trial officially concluded, the state's Cold Case Center announced the closure of the Lila Reyes file. This time not due to lack of leads, but because the full truth had been revealed. The girl's name was mentioned in many news reports as a symbol of resilience, a child who tried to save herself by leaving clues, and 14 years later, those very clues turned the entire case around. Bridgeport and Milford, places once haunted by the 2003 disappearance, could finally close a long chapter of darkness. And Connecticut's justice system recorded the case as one of the rare, fully resolved cold cases after nearly 15 years, through the power of forensics, investigators' persistence, and the traces a little girl left to tell her own story. In today's United States, the story of Lila Reyes is not just a chilling case, but a very specific reminder of how we protect children, trust forensic science, and the role of community. Lila deliberately hid underwear, a men's watch, clay toy and flyer in a pizza box, and stuffed it under the Barnum Avenue floor, an action by a 9-year-old with the mindset of leave traces for adults to find. In real life, this reminds American parents and schools to teach children specific survival skills. If controlled by someone, try to leave marks, stay calm, observe sounds, routes, surroundings like Lila described: trains, wooden stairs, a bathroom with restraint. On the other hand, the 14-year deadlock due to lack of evidence and legal limits shows the U.S. justice system works best with data. Mullin's DNA in CODIS, from a minor 2012 case, saved an entire cold case. The lesson here is that collecting, storing, and sharing forensic data, security cameras, residency records, is not just surveillance, but can truly deliver delayed justice to victims. Finally, neighbors reporting anomaly. The new homeowner on Barnum Avenue calling police upon discovering the floor void, and the cold case unit never giving up for years, show that community safety in America depends not only on police, but on every citizen willing to pay attention, ask questions, call 911 when something is wrong, even if it starts with just an old pizza box under the floor. Thank you for following to the end of the story, where justice was finally found after nearly 15 years. If you want to continue joining us on these meaningful case-solving journeys, please subscribe to the channel and see you in the next video.